Hi.
I'm Margaret Maitland. I'm Senior Curator of the Ancient Mediterranean, and
I'm Dan Potter. I'm an Assistant Curator here at the National Museum of Scotland as well.
And we want to show you some of the amazing objects that we have in the collection that tell us about ancient Egyptian beliefs in the afterlife and some of the actual objects that they took with them to the tomb. The first step on the journey to the afterlife was mummification. And this object here is a depiction of a person being mummified. Their body is lying on a funerary bier, and the god Anubis, who's a jackal-headed god of embalming, is bending over, performing the actual mummification process. In reality, this would have been performed by priests, but we have evidence that actually at least one of them would have worn a mask shaped like a jackal's head to actually stand in for the god Anubis. It was a 70-day process that involved drawing out the body and wrapping it in order to preserve it. And it was really important to the Egyptians to preserve the body because they believed it was an essential part of the self, and that while your spirit could go out and enjoy the afterlife, it needed a home to be able to return to each night in order to rest. The mobile part of the spirit that could go out of the body is represented here in this object that you can see just right there, which is a representation of the ba, the part of the spirit that could go out of the body, enjoy the delights of the afterlife, but then needed to return to the tomb to rest. And it's depicted as a human-headed bird to show that ability of it to be actually mobile. It would return to the tomb as well to actually take nourishment, and so we find in tombs that there was actually food and drink placed there. So for example, here we've got some dried bread and a dried pomegranate and some dates as well in the bowl. And there's also part of the tomb which was open to the public, in particular priests and family members, where they would give offerings of food and drink to the deceased in order to sustain them in the afterlife. And that's the scene that you can see here of decoration from the tomb chapel showing a funerary banquet in the tomb.
Now, whilst you'd like everyone to come and visit your tomb as part of your remembrance, and whilst you'd like them to leave offerings, you'd also like them to behave properly. And we have an object here that is quite rare and unusual. Now, I'm sure you've all heard the idea of tomb curses where the person's threatened for their bad behaviour, but in reality they're quite uncommon. And what we have here, the inscription on the stone there, which is written in hieratic, which is a short form of Egyptian and in black ink, is a warning to the people who came to the tomb to behave properly. So what they're told is not to take even the smallest pebble out from the tomb, that really they should be finding their own place, their own tomb to build, because every person, and I'm sure you'll agree, is happiest in their own home. So it's not a threat towards death or punishment or injury, but really that you'd be frowned upon, that it says at the very last lines that if you are to transgress against the tomb and against this warning, that the gods will approach you very, very greatly. So once you've got to the afterlife, you'd like the most comfortable situation. And here during one of Egypt's very golden ages, people took as much as they could with them. They took everything, including the kitchen sink and a spare for the kitchen sink. So here we have a few objects that were buried with different people, trying to make their afterlife the most comfortable. So you have furniture, you have cosmetics, so you can see there the little makeup pot for your eye makeup, so for both men and women who are wearing almost mascara, eyeliner kind of idea, clothing, jewellery, everything really. So taking all this is a big investment in time and wealth. So one thing the Egyptians do is find a fix around this. So you can see in front of the jewellery box there a very small box, and in front of the chair an even smaller chair. So what these objects did was, instead of being able to take the full set, the large objects, is that you make a very small a miniaturized version, and that when you reach the afterlife, they become magically activated to the full size. It's all about cutting the corners to give you that comfort in the afterlife. As well, you can use imitation objects as well. So you can see on the left there a very small glass vessel. This would have been very expensive, very difficult to make, but on the right we have an imitation of it, and made instead in pottery and ceramic, and drawn and painted with the lines that would imitate that glass. So instead of taking the very expensive one, you have a way of having that very expensive material, but in a quick and easy way. As well as taking everything from your daily life to your tomb, there are also a good amount of objects that were built and made especially for the tomb. The most indicative object of this kind is, of course, the coffin. So where the deceased individual was placed after their mummification. And here we have a really beautiful example of a young girl called Tyret Seker. Now, she's shown in a different way to the way she lived. So instead of being a young child when she died, she's shown here on her coffin as an adult, with a beautiful wig, very nice gold earrings, and as well the beautiful linen robes that she wears. So instead of being a child, she's shown as an adult figure, so that she can then go to the afterlife and enjoy the afterlife as an adult. So if you're going to the afterlife, for the Egyptians, it's really Egypt 2.0. So Egypt as a living person is great, so the afterlife is the same idea but even better. As part of this, you had to do some work. So you have to work for the king during your life, so you have to work for the king of the afterlife during the afterlife. So instead of for Osiris. But the Egyptians come up with a fix for this again, the figure there, who is a shabti figure. Now the shabti were buried with the individual, and when they reached the afterlife, if they were called upon to work, instead the shabti would do their work for them. And this one belonged to a man called Ramesses Nacht, who did one step further even than having someone to do your work for you, is that he took someone else's shabti, rubbed their name out and put his over it. So he didn't only have someone to do his work for him, but he'd even borrowed him from another person entirely.
Yeah, these are just some of the fantastic objects currently on display in our exhibition, The Tomb, Ancient Egyptian Burial, which is on at National Museum of Scotland until September 3rd. The objects that you've seen today date to Egypt's golden age around 1500 to 1200 BC. And the tomb that's the focus of our exhibition was actually used and reused for over 1,000 years. So you can come explore the story of the tomb and loads more objects. And you can also learn more about ancient Egyptian tombs and how they were built in a talk that you're doing, Dan.
Yes, so you can come and join me here at the National Museum of Scotland on Saturday 10th of June for a talk about the people who built the tombs in the Valley of the Kings. So people like Tutankhamun's tomb, the people who built those. And then as well the people who eventually came and robbed them and raided them, reused them. So it's a completely free event. It is ticketed though, so if you go online to nms.ac.uk and have a look for Spotlight on the Tomb, if you just click on there, you'll be able to get your free ticket and you'll be able to come and find out a lot more about how you build a tomb.
Thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you.